Dear guests, dear panelists, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the sixth edition of the Climate Action Conversation series, How to Respond to Water Bankruptcy. Thank you for joining us today and for contributing to this important discussion. Please note that live translation is available during the event. My name is Rahul, Project Coordinator at the Green Earth Action Foundation. Today, with my colleague Maureen, we will be moderating this session, and we hope you'll find it both informative and engaging. To give you an overview of today's session, we will begin with the keynote address by our Jeff Ambassador, Tapas Kumar Malik, from the Jeff Ambassador Program 2026 cohort. This will be followed by a panel discussion with our esteemed panelists. After the panel, we'll open the floor for a Q&A, where you will have the opportunity to ask questions. You may submit a question at any time during the session using the Q&A box. Before we dive into today's topic, I would like to invite our head of office, Baptistel Paldino, to briefly introduce our organization, the Green Earth Action Foundation. Baptistel, over to you.
Thank you, Raul, for this introduction and a warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's webinar. We are pleased to gather around a topic that is both timely and highly relevant as we prepare for the 2026 UN Water Conference, taking place later this year in December, and within the broader context of the International Decade for Action, Water for Sustainable Development. By way of brief introduction, the Green Earth Action Foundation is a UNEP-accredited non-profit organization based in Geneva, whose mission is to empower young people and communities to drive impactful and sustainable action. Jeff was founded in 2023 in response to the urgent need for more systemic, inclusive, and forward-looking approaches to the global climate crisis. Our mission is to advance sustainability by building environmental awareness and developing the next generation of informed and engaged leaders. To make this vision a reality, we carry out impactful initiatives such as our Jeff Ambassador Program. Each year, the Jeff Ambassador Program selects a cohort of Jeff ambassadors from diverse professional, academic, and socio-cultural backgrounds. Over a 6-month cycle, Jeff ambassadors are supported through 4 core components: training and development, personalized support, grant for local project implementation, and access to an international network of peers, experts, and partners. The Jeff Ambassador Program is structured to support the Jeff ambassadors in the full life cycle of their initiatives, from project design to implementation, reporting, and continued engagement. Through the training and development components, Jeff ambassadors participate in expert-led sessions covering key areas such as international climate governance, sustainable development, communication and advocacy, fundraising, innovation, and sustainability. These learning opportunities are complemented by one-to-one support from the Jeff team, providing tailored guidance on planning, budgeting, communications, implementation, and reporting. The Jeff Ambassador Program culminates on 4.29 Green Earth Action Day. It is Jeff's annual global mobilization campaign, during which all the ambassadors implement synchronized community-based actions and showcase their initiative to an international audience. Beyond its 6-month cycle, the Jeff Ambassador Program seeks to foster long-term leadership, sustained collaboration, and continued engagement within Jeff International Network. If this program sounds interesting to you, we are pleased to share that applications for the 2027 edition are now open. Interested applicants are invited to scan the QR code on the screen to read the terms of reference and to submit their application through the dedicated platform. Should you have any questions, our team remain available by email at info@jeff.foundation. Now, the reason we are gathered here today is for another one of our projects, the 6th episode of our Climate Action Conversation series. The CAC series aims to deepen understanding of climate-related challenges while introducing key concepts and practical tools for effective climate action. If you want to have a look at the previous episodes, feel free to visit our website. So thank you to all of you for joining us today and for your attention. I now have the pleasure of handing over to my colleague Maureen to continue the program.
Thank you very much, Baptiste, for this introduction. As introduced by my colleague Raoul, today's discussion will focus on water bankruptcy, a concept developed by the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health and presented in its report Global Water Bankruptcy, Living Beyond Our Hydrological Means in the Post-Crisis Era, published earlier this year in January 2026. The report argues that we have moved beyond the stage of water stress or even water crisis and have entered what is described as an era of water bankruptcy. Using the metaphor of financial bankruptcy, the report explains how, over time, human societies have withdrawn more water than climate and hydrological systems can sustainably provide. Combined with factors such as water pollution, this has significantly reduced the amount of water that is truly usable. As a result, we have now entered a post-crisis era where long-term overuse but also mismanagement of water resources have caused damage that are impossible to reverse. Because water is central to every aspect of life, water bankruptcy affects not only ecosystems and biodiversity, but also economies, food systems, public health, political stability, and social resilience. Before we begin our discussion with our panelists to understand how we got to this situation, but also how to respond to it, we are pleased to welcome Jeff Ambassador Tapas Kumar Malik for an opening keynote speech. Tapas is a youth activist from Bangladesh and the founder and executive director of SESDO. He works with coastal and rural communities in the climate vulnerable bands, focusing on mangrove restoration, youth and women's empowerment, biodiversity conservation, and climate resilience. Tapas lead youth-driven initiatives such as Mangroves for Life and actively engage schools, local authorities, and volunteers in awareness raising and hands-on climate action, inspiring communities to protect nature and act on climate challenges. Thank you very much for being here today. Now over to you, Tapas.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tapas Kumar Mollik, and I come from Satkhira, a coastal district in Bangladesh, and located beside the Sundarban, the world's largest mangrove forests. I am proud to serve as GF ambassador. I am also the founder and executive director of CISDO and the partnership and strategic planning lead at Airport Bangladesh chapter. I come from a region where climate change is not a distant concern. It's a part of everyday life. For us, water, forest, land, and people are deeply connected. Protecting nature means protecting lives and livelihoods. This is why water security, climate resilience, and community-led actions are not only part of my works, it's deeply my personal commitments. The Green Earth Action Foundation Ambassador Programs has been an important part in my leadership journey. It provides continuous guidance, mentorship, support, knowledge, and international platform to transform local climate challenges into local community-led actions. Through the program, I strengthen my capacity to design and implement environmental initiatives and that actively engage young people and women in the coastal Bangladesh. One of the things I value most about Green Earth Action Foundation is its philosophy of moving from awareness to action and action to long-term sustainability. The approach has shaped the way how I thinking and working with my communities. With ZF's continuous mentorship, support, knowledge, and inspirations, I have been inspired to develop practical and community-led solutions that connect people directly with nature and climate action. Through CISDO, I lead a mangrove restoration project and implemented in Gabura Union in Shatira. We use the community-based ecological mangrove restoration approach. As far we have completed 1.29 hectare degraded mangroves with engaging local young women, young people and women. Actually, the mangrove restoration, our mangroves for life projects is not a tree planting project, it's much bigger than tree planting. It's actually integrating local communities empowerment, coastal resilience, restoring ecosystems. And upcoming season, we are expanding our 3 hectare additional restore to degrade mangroves with integrating sustainable livelihoods. Actually, without a local communities involvement, without a local communities ownership, it's not possible to success for long-term sustainability as these kinds of projects, as like mangroves for life. And one of our most meaningful, another innovation of tree ownership model. Under this model, every school students become a tree owner. Under this projects, each children receives a saplings and planting their homes and take care of these trees for their long-term sustainability. It is also another much bigger than tree planting. Actually, in our theme in these tree ownership models, actually when a baby, a child grows, we together, a tree also grows. It's actually connection between psychologically with the people and the nature. In coastal Bangladesh, water is everywhere. But this safe fresh water is becoming harder and harder to find. When people think about Bangladesh, they often imagine a river, a rain, and floods. But in my community, the question is not whether we have water. The question is whether we have safe water. We are not facing only water crisis. We are facing three at the same time: drought, flooding, and salinity. During the dry season, our ponds dry up. During the monsoon, our villages are flooded. And saltwater remain always over the years, both making soil and water unsafe. This same family can experience these three challenges within a single year. This is why I truly believe that water bankruptcy is more than water scarcity. It is the point where natural water system cannot provide no longer enough safe fresh water to support healthy ecosystems, sustainable livelihoods, and human well-being. In Shatira, we are seeing the warning sign every year. When safe water are disappeared, farming becomes difficult. When farming suffers, then the households, the family income decreases. When family income falls, then the children are leave the school. Most of the boys enter the day labor, and most of the girls are married at an early age. And the health problem are increased because the people are forced to use unsafe water. Actually, one water crisis will become many social and economic crises. This is why water bankruptcy is not only a environmental issue, it's also a human development issue. It affects health, education, food security, livelihoods, gender equality, and human dignity. Our experience shows that water bankruptcy is not only a global concept. For millions of people living in climate vulnerable coastal communities, it is already part of everyday life. That is why protecting water means protecting people, ecosystems, and our shared future. Based on our experience, I would like to leave you two messages. The first is ecosystem restoration, especially mangrove restoration. It's a recognize one of the key of nature-based solution that strengthening both water security and climate resilience. And the second, young people and women should not only participate in the climate action, they should lead it. Communities become stronger and more resilient when local people are trusted, empowered, and supported to lead sense. In closing, I would like to say this: water is not only a natural resource, water is life, water is dignity, water is future. The challenges we face are urgent, but our capacity to respond through collective action, community leadership, and nature-based solution is even greater. Green Earth Action Foundation has been an important role in is not only in my journey but also in my community's initiative by connecting local action with global dialogue and empowering community-led solutions. Together, let us protect water, restore ecosystems, and build a more resilient future for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tapas. Your keynote conveyed very clearly how water bankruptcy is interconnected with many different challenges, not only in terms of biodiversity and environmental degradation, but also in relation to broader social issues, including livelihoods, resilience, and community well being. I believe your words will strongly resonate with the themes that will guide our discussion today. With that, it is now my pleasure to turn to our panel and introduce our experts. Our first guest today is Ms. Sylvia Kardashia. Sylvia is a PhD fellow at the University of Strasbourg in France. Her research focuses on global freshwater conservation policy and governance. Previously, she worked as a water resource specialist at the Asian Development Bank, where she led projects on water resource management, freshwater conservation, payment for ecosystem services, and climate adaptation. She is also the co chair for the Global River Protection Coalition. Thank you for being here today, Sylvia. Our second guest is Ms. Deanne Gurrier. Deanne is an environmental affairs officer at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and works at the Secretariat of the United Nations Water Convention. She supports the implementation of the Convention's triennial program of work through the provision of technical and policy support to countries and the servicing of the Convention's intergovernmental bodies. More specifically, she is in charge of coordinating the work aimed at facilitating the financing of transboundary water cooperation and basin development. Thank you for being here today, Deanne. Also joining us today is Ms. Emily Croft. Emily is a policy advisor within the International Institute for Sustainable Development's water program. She leads efforts on international policy recommendations for the team. specifically those related to water pollution, plastic pollution, and sustainable fisheries. She also leads the IISD's Next program, which annually engages and inspires hundreds of young people around the world in issues of sustainable development. Thank you for joining us today. Our next guest is Ms. Sara Ocorno. Sara is a climate and water professional with experience at the Global Center on Adaptation, the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and other organizations. Her work has focused on climate risk assessments, water and urban resilience, research, communications, and program delivery. Her experience spans working with local communities, government institutions, and international organizations to co create solutions that address climate and water challenges, particularly in vulnerable settings. Thank you for accepting our invitation, Sarah. And finally, Mr. Eric Schnitzler. Eric is a project manager at the Geneva Water Hub, focusing on water and peacemaking, with particular attention to water and mediation, and on elevating water for peace in global policy processes. He's worked previously as an environment officer at UNEP and as a consultant on water security at the OSCE. He holds an MSc in International Relations from the London School of Economics and Political Science, a BA from the University of Basel, and a certificate on advanced studies in government in water governance from the University of Geneva. Mr. Snetzler, thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to hand over the floor to my colleague Maureen to lead today's panel discussion. Maureen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Raul, for introducing our panelists. Now let's dive into today's subject. And also for all of our participants, do not forget to share your question using the Q&A box, and we'll answer all of them, or at least try to, right after our panel. One of the main key takeaways from the report we've discussed earlier is the need to rethink, but also reorganize existing governance tools. Before turning to the future, I think it's really important to also look at the current governance landscape. The Water Convention is one of the key international frameworks in this area, particularly when it comes to transboundary waters. Ms. Guerrier, could you maybe tell us a bit more about the convention, its main objectives, but also the day-to-day work carried out by its secretariat?
Yes, sure. Do you hear me well, Maureen?
Yes, I hear you
Everyone?
well.
Okay, great. So thanks again for the invitation. Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe good evening to everyone. And apologize for being a bit late. I was stuck in another meeting, but I'm happy to be here now. Yeah, thank you for this good question to start. Let's say this panel discussion. We know that some of the key features of water bankruptcy, right, that are stated in this report that you mentioned, includes, for example, depletion of natural water capital, chronic overuse of water beyond renewable supply, or also irreversible ecological damage, right? So we are really increasingly facing water scarcity and water quality degradation. And in such context, coordinated governance is one of the first steps to take to address these challenges. And furthermore, we also know that across the world, like 153 countries are sharing transboundary waters through rivers, lakes, aquifers. And these transboundary waters represent 60% of the global freshwater flow. So it's a lot. And 40% of the world population live in this transboundary basin, which basically support the livelihood of 3 billion people. So it's a lot. So indeed, having transboundary water governance in place really plays a crucial role in addressing a water bankruptcy. And especially because, as you might know, when we look at the latest result of the SDG indicator 652 reporting exercise, which measure cooperation over shared waters, only 43 countries basically that are sharing waters have operational arrangement in place for 90% or more of their transboundary waters. So there is a long way to go. And it's true that in this context, the Convention on the Protection and Use of Transboundary Water Courses and International Lake, which we also call the UN Water Convention, can really be a starting point to shape water governance at transboundary, but also at national level. So very briefly, to give you a quick introduction on the convention, the Secretariat of the Convention is serviced by the UNEC, so the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which is one of the 5 regional economic commission of the United Nations. And The convention is really at the same time a global and legal institutional framework as well as a global platform, and it's open for accession to all United Nations member states. And it currently has 59 parties from different regions. And the latest one joining actually are Sierra Leone and Bangladesh. And as a legal framework, the UN Water Convention really aims to protect, ensure the quantity, quality, and sustainable use of transboundary water resources by facilitating and promoting cooperation. So it really serves as a mechanism to strengthen international cooperation and implement national measures for sustainable management and protection of transboundary waters. So it really basically requires its parties to prevent, control, and reduce transboundary impact. And to do so, it really relies on three principles or pillars that we call them in international water law: the principle of prevention, no harm, principle of equitable and reasonable utilization, and the principle of cooperation. And so it has a set of obligations for parties, for riparian parties, covering a number of topics. But what's interesting with the convention is that it's because there is this principle of cooperation. So it has provision that require its parties to enter into agreement and to establish joint bodies, so being River Commission, River Basin Organization, to put in place all the provisions that are related to prevention of impacts, equitable and reasonable use, basically. And even though that it focuses on transboundary waters, its principles can significantly improve how countries manage all their water resource domestically. And maybe a few additional words, because you were asking about the day-to-day work. So apart from being a text to which you accede, I mean, an official international convention to which you become party, then after this, you can really benefit from the support of the institutional framework of the convention, which is made of different bodies, including, of course, the Secretariat, which support the parties through the implementation of the program of work, which is adopted every 3 years. So really, this institutional framework is backing basically the work of the Secretariat. And through the program of work, we basically have a facilitative and catalytic role, and we support countries on policy processes at national and basin level. We provide capacity building on technical and policy issues through, for example, thematic workshop at basin or global level to enable countries and parties to exchange knowledge, exchange experience. And we also, big part of our work is to support development agreement. And in addition to this, we provide also technical assistance, but also tools, guidance document, and policy recommendation on specific topics that are related with transboundary water cooperation, such as climate change adaptation in shared basin, water allocation, as I said, how to develop agreements, etc., through by unpacking specific case studies. And maybe one last point, and I will finish here. What's interesting also with the convention is that we help countries to monitor and report by reporting under the convention every 3 years, which helps them to also gather data and see where they still have challenges and needs to increase and accelerate transboundary water cooperation that will then help to address some of the water bankruptcy challenges. So yeah, the Water Convention is, as I said, a legal framework and an intergovernmental platform that can help countries think together collectively on how to address this challenge related to water bankruptcy. Thank you very much, Maureen.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think you perfectly showed how international frameworks are really essential for addressing water-related challenges. As of course, we've mentioned, water systems extend beyond national borders. But at the same time, and you also mentioned this in your response, national contexts also remain important. Also when shaping how these frameworks are implemented in practice. If we look at specific cases, the implementation of water policies, whether at the national or even local level, requires institutional capacities, but also financial resources. Mrs. Kardashian, you have significant experience in this area, notably through your work with the Asian Development Bank on integrated water and natural resources management in the People's Republic of China, but also Mongolia. Could you maybe tell us more about this work and also share some key lessons on what is needed to move from policy commitment to effective implementation?
Sure. Thank you, Maureen. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Okay, good. Yeah, so thanks, and yeah, it's a great introduction also on the international convention. Now, I'll talk a little bit about my work in China and Mongolia. Of course, I've worked through several projects, so I will just highlight some of the key aspects. And it's interesting because China and Mongolia offer two very different perspectives. So in China, for instance, I can talk about a project that I led in South Dongting Lake. And to give you a sense of the scale, this is the second largest freshwater lake in China, in the country, and it plays a vital role in regulating and storing water from the Yangtze River. And we are in Hunan province, so in southwest China. So the size of the loan from EDB was actually, it was quite sizable for a wetland restoration project, $150 million. And also this project run in partnership with the French Development Agency. So the project, when I led the design, it was approved in 2024 and it's under implementation. So if you're interested, you can also look it up on the internet, because I can also provide you a link of the project. I think, and I want to share some lessons from this project, because what makes it interesting, it's specifically the design, because it combines wetland restoration, so to provide habitat for migratory birds along the East Asian, Australasian flyway, with productive activities like, for instance, ecotourism and sustainable farming. And this is, I think, the key to long-term financial sustainability. So combining biodiversity conservation, in this case freshwater, with revenue-generating activities. In fact, the project also set up an eco-compensation mechanism, so sort of like payment for ecosystem services, to incentivize farmers to adopt eco-friendly practices. And that mechanism is actually funded by channeling income from ecotourism and commercial harvesting of wetland reeds. So it's sort of like a conservation mechanism that pays for itself. So this is China, and of course we know that China has also big capacity. Mongolia is a completely different story, because it doesn't have, for instance, China's landscape and also China's borrowing capacity, and it can commit to loans of that size. But its civil society is very promising. In fact, on this topic, I worked on a climate adaptation project supporting resilience in very remote provinces of Mongolia. And the most distinctive feature of this project was that the bank provided small grants to 28 local civil society organizations to drive their own adaptation initiatives. And the results were actually quite important. In fact, they improved access to water, promoted sustainable livestock management, and also created new economic opportunities. In fact, local communities in this case are really best placed to identify the solutions that work for their own people and the environment. On the other hand, we also worked at the institutional level, building capacity in the Climate Change Research and Cooperation Center, which sits under the Ministry of Environment and Tourism in Mongolia. So here's one of the key lessons that I want to share, that to move from commitment to effective implementation, in fact, working bottom up with civil society and the community, as also Tapas highlighted in his keynote, is just as important as working with government institutions. In fact, you need both. And thank you, Maureen. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this answer. I think very interesting. Of course, when talking about policies, international, national, and even local, it's always very important to also keep this aspect of the financial component of any type of policy, but also institutional component. So I think very interesting answer. As we have also noted in Tapa's keynote, in the introduction, and I think in all of your answers, we really see that water and water bankruptcy is a really multifaceted concept. Water is the foundation of human development, but also planetary stability. It really underpins, ecosystems, integrity, human security, but of course, food and energy production as well. Something that is mentioned in the report that was mentioned earlier is that roughly 70% of global freshwater withdrawal are used for agriculture, much of it by farmers in the global south. Mr. Okorno, based on your research, how have you seen the water stress evolve in the agricultural sector, particularly in vulnerable regions? What are the main impacts of this growing pressure on farmers' food system, but also long-term water security? Oh, you are currently on mute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Great. So thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Jeff, for this opportunity. So to provide a brief background, agriculture is mainly like one of the major contributors to economies across the global south. And it is dominated by smallholder farmers. And to a large extent, it is rain-fed. Yes. So most of these farmers depend largely on the rainfall, the timings of the rainfall to go ahead with their farming activities and all. Now to move to how water stress has evolved in the agriculture sector. Water stress really used to be a seasonal issue. Okay. It followed the seasons, it followed the pattern. So we have the rainfall season, we have the dry season. So it was more like a predictable phenomenon, and farmers really knew about that, and then they planned their farming activities around that. So it wasn't much of a problem then. But right now, because of how erratic the rainfalls have become, the onset and the duration and the cessation of rainfall has become highly uncertain. So it has kind of reduced the kind of confidence farmers had in planting. Most of them even plant in anticipation of the rains come, and then everything is fine. But right now, because of the uncertainty, if they should go ahead and plant and the rains are delayed, their crop yields are kind of compromised. So we are at that point where water stress has become persistent. Unlike previously where it was a seasonal situation, now it has become more persistent. We have more frequent dry spells. So another way that water stress has evolved is that water stress right now has moved from being a, an availability issue. I think Mr. Tapas mentioned that it is not really about availability alone, but it has become an issue of how water is managed, how water is stored, how water is distributed, how water is preserved and all. And for most parts of the global south, these systems are characterized by ineffective policies, governance structures, and weak policies. So although water may be available, all right, but because these systems are not working, inevitably we are in a state of water stress. One last point I would like to add is that now water stress is not really again about water, availability. It has also become a quality problem. So if I should use Ghana as an example, we have a lot of surface water resources. But if you go to some areas, some of these surface water resources have been polluted beyond use. So yes, the water is available, but what do you use it for? Illegal mining has polluted these water bodies. It has left harmful and toxic metals in this water. So should farmers go ahead and use this water, it means you are jeopardizing your farm. Your crops will not yield. Even in the long run, you end up poisoning your soil. Households are not able to use the water because they are highly polluted. So sometimes it's not about the water not being available, but the water is available. There's the supply, but then the quality of the water doesn't make the water usable. So that is inevitably a state of water stress. Or the water is also available, but then the systems, there's poor management system, poor policy enforcement, poor infrastructure systems, and all of these fuels water stress. So that is the state where we are now. Water stress has moved from being a seasonal and predictable phenomenon to a more persistent, phenomenon. It happens in and out of seasons, and it has now become a quality problem. It has become a systems problem. So thank you, Maureen. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your answer. I think very interesting to see. We start the question with talking about agriculture and farmers, and we end up with the answer that goes way further than simply biodiversity and agricultural question, talking about the management of water, the availability of water, the quality of water, and also the policy. If we focus on the management and the availability, of course, as we've seen, agriculture cannot be discussed without addressing water conservation conservation and overall regulation, as it is central to food production, livelihoods, but also long-term resource sustainability. Coming back to Ms. Kardashia, your research looks at freshwater conservation and governance, including how water-society relationships shape policy, but also regulation. In the context of water bankruptcy, what are your findings concerning the current gaps in policy, and how also could national governance framework better support more sustainable and maybe also equitable water management?
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. So yeah, I think it might help to start by defining a bit what I mean by freshwater conservation in the context of my current PhD research. So, but first giving you a background. So freshwater ecosystems, by which of course we mean rivers, lakes, wetlands, floodplains, they support more than 10% of all known species, and they're vital for preserving biodiversity, maintaining ecosystem functions, and providing essential services for human well-being. And they're also unique because their ecological health, in fact, depends on key ecological attributes. So the hydrological regime, water quality, as it was mentioned, but also river connectivity, for instance, between longitudinal and lateral, so between upstream and between the river and the floodplain, biotic composition and habitat. So there's quite a few pressures on these ecosystems. In fact, as we know, about 24% of freshwater species face a high risk of extinction. About 35% of wetlands were lost between the 70s and 2015, and only 37% of long rivers actually remain free-flowing. Free-flowing means that there is no barriers, no dams built on the river channel. So these multiple pressures are human pressures, anthropogenic, so hydropower, over abstraction, land use change, pollution, invasive species. These are of course also intensified by climate change. And here, so the crucial point, in fact, is governance. So the main drivers of this freshwater biodiversity loss originate, in fact, outside of the water sector or the conservation policy. In fact, they come from decisions in other sectors, particularly, as was mentioned, in agriculture, but also energy, which is a big driver. In fact, they drive hydrological alteration and pollution. So if we want to address this crisis, we have to look closely at policy design, implementation, and governance, not only of the policies in the water sector, but also like how these are integrated within the broader sort of, let's call them productive sectors. No, so as of today, in fact, there exist policies to protect freshwater. In fact, this is also how freshwater conservation is defined. There are many instruments. So there is the Global Biodiversity Framework by the Convention of Biodiversity that sets standards for conservation and restorations of ecosystems, including rivers and inland waters. The Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, and at the EU level, we have the Water Framework Directive, the Nature Directives, we have the Nature Restoration Law, which was just approved a year ago or a year and a half ago, and various national mechanisms and policies, such as regulations, for instance, for protecting environmental flows, so the quantity, but also the quality of flows to enable, freshwater conservation. But the main conservation gap, in fact, well, there are many, but the one that I want to highlight here is actually the lack of horizontal and vertical coordination across all these instruments that I've just mentioned. So policies from different sectors like water conservation, energy, agriculture, they aren't harmonized usually. And that's where the implementation fails. So the classic example, there's so many, but one of those is actually hydropower development. We all know we need energy, but it also destroys river connectivities and freshwater habitats. So there needs to be a trade-off there. So how could national frameworks do better? One of the key aspects is actually what I want to highlight as a key point is policy integration and harmonization. So we need to embed river and wetland conservation into other sectoral policies, including land use planning, energy strategies, water quality regulations, diffuse agricultural pollution control, and also plan these interventions at the basin scale, which should be our unit, and that also goes back to the transboundary scale that Dan was mentioning, and where conservation and productive activities can be balanced. So that's how you can try to reduce conflicting objectives and also manage the trade-offs between conservation and development. So over to you, Maureen.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Again, I think something that really comes up to in all of the answer, we have now talked about policies, freshwater conservation, agriculture, etc., is really the need for coordinated work, but also how interlinked all of these issues really are. If I'm thinking about freshwater conservation, something also that comes to mind is also not only the quantity of water, but also the quality of water. This is also something that Sarah just discussed when talking about agriculture. Water quality degradation really is a factor that is shrinking the truly usable water resource base. Mrs. Croft, you contributed to a report from IISD called Determining the Economic Cost of Single-Use Plastic Waste in Canada. That was published just at the beginning of the month in early June. Could you maybe tell us more about this report and also share your perspective on the current situation regarding water pollution in Canada, its impact, and maybe any recommendation?
Sure, thank you. So yeah, my specialty is plastic pollution, specifically in water areas. But the factor that I'm studying this in Canada is very relevant. So Canada is a really large country. It's roughly the same size as all of Europe, but with only 40 million people in the entire country. My region is even less populated. So the province that we're doing this research is larger than the entire country of France, but under 2 million people living here. And those 2 million people are clustered all around one major city. So why I'm telling you this, it means we have very large areas with lots of water and freshwater lakes, but really no human settlements near those lakes. And we're finding pollution in those lakes anyway. So, just to give you an idea, we did some testing, just baseline testing on a lake in our area that has no human settlement within a 100-kilometer radius. And we found plastic in the lake, not plastic like single-use plastics, but microplastics. And we found how it got there is through atmospheric deposition. So that means that when water evaporates, it actually picks up small particles of plastic and carries it so that when it rains, that's falling. So if you take a deep breath in right now, you probably just breathed in some plastic. So this really relates to the work that my team is doing on plastic, because what we find is that when it comes to pollution, by the time it reaches the water and causes those negative effects, we're kind of too late to really clean it up properly. So it's still good to clean up pollution of any kind out of water, but what you really want from the policy perspective is something more up the stream. So, a lot of clothing, even now, contains chemicals and plastics that when you wash your clothes, even if you have a filter on the laundry machine, too bad it's getting into the waterways anyway. So, what we did with this report that we published at the beginning of the month is we said, okay, many people care deeply about the environment and they already agree with us that we should limit pollution. But what about people who actually don't care about the effects of pollution in water? Maybe if they understood how expensive this is to manage financially, it would motivate them also. And we did find that it's very expensive, even for Canadian municipalities, but likely elsewhere too, to manage the waste once it's out there. So you can really make the argument from any angle that it's much better to prevent any kind of pollution from reaching the water in the first place, almost like with our own health, right? The prevention of disease is much better than curing disease, both for the patient, but also economically, it's cheaper. We can think of the planet in a similar way. And as much as this is really significant from the policy perspective, this is also something everyone can start implementing in little bits in their own life. because even if you are perfect at recycling and managing your waste, the second you take a plastic item off the shelf, you're releasing those microplastics. So we can all be more careful about limiting our plastic use in our own life.
Thank you very much. The report seems extremely interesting, so I really encourage everyone that has the opportunity to read it, to have a look through it. I think something that is really interesting in your answer is also to show how social this issue is. It's not only about policies, it's not only about biodiversity and maybe some scientific aspect of the issue, but it's really something that really touches all of us and is deeply social by nature. And I think another figure that really illustrates this dimension really well is also the rise in water-related conflicts. So we know that water can play different roles in conflict. It can act as a trigger, as a weapon, or even become a casualty of conflict itself. Mr. Schnetzler, could you maybe explain in more detail what is driving this rise in water-related conflicts and what lies behind these figures?
Sure. Thank you, Maureen, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation and the opportunity to join this excellent panel today. The rise in water-related conflicts is indeed very concerning, and it reflects a deeply troubling global trend. I'd say before we examine the drivers behind this rise, it might be useful to distinguish broadly between two categories of water-related conflict. So on the one hand, we have conflicts that are primarily about water, so-called water conflicts. So these are disputes in which water itself is the core issue, whether over allocation, competing uses, or water quality. And on the other hand, we have conflicts that are not primarily about water, but in which water nonetheless plays a significant role. And in these cases, water becomes a tool, a target, or a casualty of war. And in these cases, water is also increasingly and deliberately weaponized, which is another very concerning trend that we're seeing. So for instance, when dams are destroyed, supply lines are cut, or treatment plants are bombed to inflict harm on civilian populations or for military gain. The destruction of the Kharkovka Dam a few years ago is a good example of this. I should say, though, that in nearly all active conflicts today, water features in one way or another. Whether we look at Gaza, where water treatment plants and pipelines have been systematically targeted, compounding an already catastrophic humanitarian crisis, or Sudan, where access to water sources has become a critical factor in displacement and survival. So all of this points to a pattern of broader systemic failure. And I would say what unites and drives both categories of conflict, water-related conflicts, is at root a crisis of accountability. Because the rise in these conflicts is directly linked to the fact that international norms and laws are too often disregarded, and crucially, those who breach them are rarely held accountable. So this is especially alarming given that we are also currently witnessing the highest number of armed conflicts involving state and non-state actors since the founding of the United Nations. And as the Water Bankruptcy report makes clear, water bankruptcy is a justice and security issue at heart. And the costs of water overshoot and irreversibility fall disproportionately on the most vulnerable. So, for instance, smallhold farmers, rural and indigenous communities, women and youth, while the benefits have often accrued to more powerful actors. So this is also something that fuels grievance and instability and conflict. I would say, though, that even in this crisis, there's a lot of room for hope, and the concept of water bankruptcy can serve as a powerful tool to elevate water higher on the global policy agenda. So at the Geneva Water Hub, we're actively working toward that goal. For instance, we recently convened a meeting of the Group of Friends on Water and Peace here in Geneva, where we invited Geneva-based diplomats and introduced them to the concept of Global Water Bankruptcy Report. We were even lucky to have Professor Kaveh Madani, the lead author of the report, as our keynote speaker, and to present his views on the linkages between water bankruptcy and peace. Another avenue that we're pursuing is that we're just about to launch a policy brief for the upcoming UN 26 Water Conference. that we're authoring together with two think tanks from the co-host countries of this conference. So one think tank from the UAE called Trends Research and Advisory, and one from Senegal, Polo Dakar, our sister hub in Senegal. And in this policy brief, we're also arguing that peace is and should be the unifying thread across all the 6 interactive dialogues of the UN26 Water Conference, and really try to push for that messaging that's also very strongly anchored in the Water Bankruptcy report. Lastly, on our efforts on countering the weaponization of water, we also recently launched an alliance, a global alliance to spare water from armed conflict, together with about a dozen states and also organizations like UNICEF, WASH Cluster, PAX, and others, with the intent and goal to really protect the human dignity of conflict-affected populations by disseminating the legal and technical tools needed to safeguard water and its infrastructure, particularly during and after armed conflict. So I think these are some of the positive and necessary steps we must pursue. Over to you, Maureen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this answer. I think also something that is quite interesting, as you noted, is that recognizing this concept of water bankruptcy is not only, something that could be a bit stressful, seeing all of the negative impacts and the current situation, whether related to social issue, to economic issue, even environmental issues. But this concept is also kind of pathway to elevate water in the global agenda as a whole. So if we go back to this global agenda, international framework, Ms. Guerrier, in the future, how could the Water Convention maybe serve as a tool to help address water bankruptcy? And maybe more specifically, how can it function both as a legal framework and as a platform for cooperation, supporting countries in developing collective responses to the challenges linked to water bankruptcy?
Yes, thanks a lot, Maureen, for the second question. I think we heard it. I mean, water bankruptcy is not caused by a single factor, right? But by also compounding pressures, including let's say, over allocation and overuse, groundwater depletion, pollution, land and ecosystem degradation, and obviously climate change. And as briefly mentioned at the beginning, and you said it again, the UN Water Convention basically provides a legal framework, but also an intergovernmental practical platform to advance transboundary water cooperation. And through these two hats, let's say, it can really help countries and especially its parties to address collectively some of this pressure, and therefore address their consequences on water resources, especially those that are shared. So I mentioned earlier on, via the triennial program of work that we have, that the Secretariat helped to implement, we really support policy processes and technical cooperation from national, basin, and global level. And we focus on various topics. Obviously, the text of the convention is the starting point, but we also work on various aspects that are related to this provision, including climate change, water allocation, nexus. And I will give you some concrete example of support from the Secretariat provided to countries in building a collective answers. For example, one of our core business is to support the development of agreement, because obviously as a legal framework, the convention, one of the convention requirements is for its parties to enter informal agreement and joint bodies. So we support countries in doing this, that help them to build trust, facilitate transboundary dialogue. So we help them to develop, also sometimes revise agreements or arrangement based on the convention text. And recent work we have been doing, actually also in collaboration with Geneva Water Hub, is, for example, to support the riparian countries of the Senegalo-Mauritanian aquifer basin. So Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Mauritania. Three out of four of these countries are party to the convention, to develop a specific agreement to to manage this aquifer, because nothing was existing before. And this agreement that should be signed soon between the four countries is interesting, because it shows how cooperation and dialogue between countries can really help preventing, in this case, groundwater depletion and enabling the collective management and protection of an aquifer for the benefit of the population. And the discussion ongoing around this aquifer has been also really interesting in terms of involving also in the discussion some technical and financial partners to also secure some support to actually implement the content of the agreement. So the convention can help to basically institutionalize the cooperation. Another example is the assistance that we bring to countries on specific topics. For example, on climate change adaptation, we have been supporting transboundary adaptation strategy by developing joint adaptation strategy, identifying priority measures to adapt the basin to climate change. We have been doing pilot adaptation on the ground, for example, in basins such as the Dniester, Sava, Chutalas basins. And, echoing also what one of the other speakers was saying, I think one of the important aspects also is to enable, intersectoral discussion. Yes, it's Sylvia, sorry, I think, who mentioned this, speaking about also the agriculture, energy, etc. And for example, under the convention, we have been developing methodologies for water, food, energy ecosystem nexus assessment to better understand what are the interactions between water, food, energy, and ecosystem, what are the trades-off and synergies, the risk also and opportunities in shared basin. And we have been more specifically supporting countries in carrying out assessments, to identify what are the sectoral conflicts, highlight the potential benefit of cooperation, and make policy recommendations. For example, we have been doing this in the Sava Basin, the Sirdarya Basin in Central Asia, Sava Basin in Eastern Europe. And based on this, the convention has also developed some cross-sectoral solution and investment that can generate benefits across multiple sectors. And finally, I will maybe speak a little bit more about the international intergovernmental platform aspect of the convention, because as a global cooperation hub, through its institutional mechanism made of its working group, task force, meeting of the parties, like the convention really offer a place where actually now more than 130 countries, so not only parties, but also countries that are not parties, are exchanging experience, driving the work of the Secretariat to help the Secretariat develop soft law materials on specific issues such as, how to address water allocation, how to adapt in transboundary basin, how to improve monitoring and data sharing, etc., etc. And I think this is the strength of the convention, is that countries can really use their own experience and difficulty they are experiencing to drive the discussion and shape the discussion on transboundary water cooperation. So I will stop here for the sake of time. Thank you very much, Maureen.
Thank you. Thank you to you. I think very interesting answer. Also, something that I really note is the intersectional work that is being done, and also the cross-sectional solution that are being offered to countries. I think this really makes me think about the need to have, of course, reform in the water sector, but that these reforms and the way we are gonna do policies in the future can only be effective if it's also just and inclusive. Considering, as you've mentioned, broader realities, rural economic diversification, the needs of vulnerable communities as a whole. As we have seen right before, the countries in the global south are already at the forefront of water bankruptcy. Mrs. Okorno, you've mentioned the case of Ghana, for example. Some other regions are also experiencing severe water stress. From your perspective, what kind of innovation, policies, or even governance approaches are needed to ensure that water bankruptcy is addressed collectively and that future reforms are fair, inclusive, and responsive also to local realities?
Thank you, Maureen, for your question. I hope I've heard. All right,
Yes.
sure. So as you rightfully said, many countries across the global south risk water bankruptcy. So at this point, designing reforms is not a luxury. It has become a necessity. But I believe that this whole process must start with us putting the affected communities or the affected groups at the center of designing these reforms. Because these guys come with a truckload of knowledge, a truckload of lived experience that it's not possible to find anywhere else. So if we should sideline them and then, develop our own policies and reforms and then just come and dump it on them, it might not really work. So what I'm saying is one of the approaches we have to use is to use an inclusive approach. We have to keep these affected groups of people or communities at the center of, designing these reforms. And also one advantage of keeping them, at the center of it is that they help shaping these policies and reform in local realities. Sometimes the local realities are that market access is limited. Another thing is maybe institutional capacity is limited. But if we don't bring them along in the whole process, we stay out there and then we create our own reforms and all with our own realities in mind, and then we just dump it on them in the community, it would not work. But if we should bring them on board, at the end of the day, it's hard for them to adapt to whatever policy has been, designed. It's hard for them to even push it and even run with it. And in the long run, there's sustainability because they have bought into the idea, they have bought into the innovation. So keeping them at the center is one approach that I think we don't have to discard. Another important approach here I would mention is fairness. Beyond having the people in the community, being at the center, we have to look at the issue also from a gender lens, recognizing the realities of gender in our communities. So both men and women must be given, adequate opportunities to be involved or to participate in decision making. Because I believe that a good water reform should be one that, solves or attempts to solve the issue of water, insecurity, not one that widens the gap of insecurity or not one that, pushes the burden onto the vulnerable community. I would give an example in this regard. Maybe we come up with a policy about promoting efficient irrigation technologies. But then we've not really sat down to think that, are these technologies able to be used by the people in the community? What if they cannot afford these technologies? What if they don't have access to the support to use these technologies? So at the end of the day, we come up with policies that are good intended policies that should, send us somewhere. But because we didn't include the people from the community, we didn't look at the various perspectives. We have women, we have men, we have youth. We didn't look at the various perspectives and then we just went ahead to design the policies. It might fail. So one other approach is to include fairness. There should be adequate opportunity for women and men and even youth to support the whole process. And then one approach I would love to add to it is that water bankruptcy, I believe, cannot be addressed by, one institution. I think that's one thing that the report mentioned. It cannot be addressed by only one institution. It is a multi, sectorial, work that needs to be done. So I believe there should be an intentional collaboration between the various an intentional collaboration between the various departments, the various institutions, the various sectors. Because one decision that one sector makes or one department makes inevitably affects every other institution or every other sector. So there must be an intentional, approach to pool resources and efforts together from the various departments, institutions, from government, from the private sector, even from the communities as well, to make sure that at the end of the day we are all on the same page, so that we don't end up widening the inequality gap, or we don't end up pushing the burden onto the community. Yes, and I think you mentioned about economic diversification, which I think is key to resilience. As I mentioned in my first, input, most of the people in these local communities have their earnings and their income tied to water related ventures like farming, like fishing. But then if we diversify our income strategies, it builds resilience, because we are talking about water stress now. What if you get to the point where there's really no water? They can fall onto other, ventures like maybe tailoring, decoration, any other thing. So it's up to us to also give them that opportunity, make it possible for them to learn new skills, to learn, new ways of actually earning income, so that there will be resilience. Yes. So thank you, Maureen, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And yeah, I think really great answer and showing how policies that will be made and decided in the future really need to include all societies. Also, we've discussed, so we've discussed how the policy need to be just and inclusive. Coming back to another subject we've discussed in the earlier question surrounding water quantity and water quality. Mrs. Croft, I was wondering if maybe you have any other recommendation for national policymakers. I don't know if you think, this current situation can really serve as a catalyst for developing new policies that are better aligned with today's water-related challenges.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, every national government will have their own unique situation, right? Sometimes they will have more water scarcity issue. In other places, it's a more flooding issue, or maybe something totally different. But if I could sort of summarize the thinking in one concise way, it would be to think whole system. So when we think, for example, about water quality and pollution, it's not enough to think about the body of water that is polluted. We have to think about the system upstream that made it polluted. But it can be similar thinking if it's a water quantity issue. What's your unique ecosystem where you live? What's the watershed like? What are the surrounding environments like? And how can you adapt your own national or even local level policy to be suitable for that particular locality?
Thank you very much. And another small point, because I know that you are leading the IISD Next program. We have mentioned the need to include all part of societies in policies. I was just wondering, in terms of young people, how can young people be meaningfully involved in shaping and supporting these policy responses?
Yeah, there are many ways. It's a cliche to say that youth are the future. I will say youth are the present. So the youth that I'm working with through the ISD Next program are already getting directly involved with policies. They're attending UN water meetings and actually setting up bilaterals with policymakers working on relevant areas to them. And it's much lower barrier to get involved in these networks than you think. So even if you're a youth from a background where it's not going to be feasible to start buying plane tickets or attending a meeting, you can just join online with youth networks, even international ones, that are working on these issues, and you can give your ideas so that even if you aren't able to physically go and influence yourself, you can still allow your ideas to travel and be heard. So there are so many different ones. One lead that I'll give in case there are any youth listening today. There's a group called CYMG, the Children and Youth Major Group under UNEP, who do excellent work for all areas under UNEP. Also, if you feel you don't have enough knowledge in the water policy area and you'd like more so that you can make a difference, you can get involved in the program that I run, which is IISD Next, Next, Next. And this is a program that allows you to learn a bit more about how policy works and what the most pressing issues are, so then you can take the next step with the knowledge.
Thank you so much. Really hope that there's some young people with us today and that you will be able to join either of this program. As said, that you don't have to travel to be physically in the meetings, in the location of the different conference, etc., to be able also to hear your voice. So if there's any interest also, please make sure to check these programs. I think we have really short amount of time in the panel for a very last question. And I think for Mr. Schnetzler, we've discussed already the link between security and water, and in the report, it calls for water to be recognized as a foundation for peace building and for stronger link to be made between water governance, conflict prevention, and peace building efforts. From your perspective, why is water such an important entry point for peace building, and how can cooperation around water help prevent conflict, but also support more stable and resilient communities?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And we at the Geneva Water Hub, we really also echoed this call to recognize water as a foundation for peace building. And we think that this is precisely where we should focus our efforts, because I think as it came out now in the discussion is that water is really far more than a technical or environmental issue. It's also a human right, necessary condition for life, dignity, livelihoods. And sort of there's almost an intrinsic assumption that we can have that water is therefore also conducive to peace and peace building, really across the conflict cycle, if you will. So in terms of prevention, but also during peacemaking and post-conflict peace building and reconstruction. I think there are several reasons why water is very unique when it comes to peace building and why it's very useful. And I would like to highlight very briefly maybe four reasons. One is that water, of course, inevitably links upstream and downstream states and communities together, whether they like it or not. So rivers and aquifers, they don't respect political borders. And this creates this interdependence that in a sense, almost obliges cooperation, even when relations are tense. And this can be done, for instance, by joint fact-finding, transparent data exchange. We can reduce uncertainty and help build trust, etc. And the UNECE, for instance, is doing a lot of this work, facilitating, encouraging cooperation, even through indicator reporting. This can all lead to continuous dialogue and trust building, because in the end, it's all about relationships between people, if you will. A second reason is that water enables dialogue even during crises. And this is something that we have witnessed in many conflicts across the globe, sort of that water is often the last thing that, warring parties are still sort of cooperating over, because sometimes it's just necessary, because if you would, cut the water in your area and then in the area controlled by your enemy, this might lead to a spread of diseases because suddenly they don't have water and it becomes a health issue. Then these diseases can come back to you. For instance, cholera, when sewage water and drinking water mix, and it can really lead to detrimental health consequences. So there is some good reasons why even during conflict, parties still water utilities still have to talk to each other. And we at the Geneva Water Hub, we think that this is also an opportunity to sort of diplomatize these talks and really use them for peacemaking and peace building. As a third point, I'd like to highlight what has also been said already, that water really links to other sectors and therefore increases the negotiation pie, if you will. So rather than just negotiating maybe about water quality or quantity issues, if that's a big issue between parties, they can also start thinking about how it links to hydropower, to trade, to food security, etc. A good example of this is in West Africa, where you have a river basin organization, the Senegal River Development Organization, the OMVS, where four countries sharing a river have jointly invested in hydropower to harness equitably the benefits generated from this hydropower. And this kind of cooperation has persisted even when relations between the countries were tense some years ago. So it's a way that countries can still cooperate over water even during tension, by looking at all these benefits that water can generate. And lastly, I would just also like to highlight that international water law provides a crucial foundation for negotiations, and also human rights law and even IHL. So the UN Water Convention, they offer really lots of instruments and have a clear set of principles on the equitable and reasonable use, the duty to prevent significant harm, and so on. And these norms and laws really provide a predictable and legitimate basis that can help in negotiation and can help level the playing field to ensure that water agreements can really be fair and sustainable at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I can stop here. Sorry, it might have been a bit long.
No worries. Thank you so much. Very nice answer. I think also it gave us the perfect way to conclude our panel on a more hopeful note and also on some things to look out in the future. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for your thoughtful contribution and insightful answers. I think throughout the discussion, we have covered many different points. We have already received a few questions for our panelists for the Q&A. However, if you would like to submit another question, it's not too late. Feel free to type it directly in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible. Time is running up, so I cannot say that we will answer all questions, but we'll do our best. I'm just gonna randomly select any question. Kindly ask our panelists to please keep your answer as short as possible so we have time to go through different questions. So I see a first question. I believe that would be for Tapas. So Tapas, based on your experience with mangroves for life, what is one practical lesson that other communities facing water insecurity could adapt to strengthen their own climate and water resilience? Tapas, if you'd like to give a really short answer.
Actually, our regions are totally different from others. If you search in Google and YouTube, then just only say Bangladesh Satra districts. It's an island. It's the base located in the world's biggest mangrove forest, Sundarban. Okay. Our communities are totally just, I would give you just some example, just two sentences. Our total peoples are 80 to 90% people depends on mangrove forest, number one. Number two, in our regions, up to 80% girls are early marriages because of water, because of economics. Okay. Our totally the climate, the vulnerable, totally the people's the real condition is one of the most vulnerable. That's why one of the key survival point is to the mangrove forest. Mangrove forest is not to protect our coastal communities from the climate crisis, but also support to livelihood. But for this overuses on mangrove forest, divided the mangrove forest, the coastal ecosystem, the ecosystems are disappear, are damaging, affected. Okay. So that's why if we protect our mangrove forest, if we protect our coastal ecosystem, then if mangrove forest will be good, then our coastal communities will be similarly good. For these reasons, our first priority is to protect our mangrove forest, our coastal ecosystem. Actually, our regions are totally different from others. It's totally,
Yes.
actually, the three things, actually, drought, flooding, and salinity. These three combines the water insecurities are visible in our regions. And our everything is depends on this water and this mangrove forest. For these reasons, we try to protect our coastal ecosystems and the mangrove forests. Thank you.